When Queen Camilla bent down to speak with Princess Charlotte, she didn't realize that Catherine was watching, and what happened next changed everything. It all started like a typical spring weekend in the royal schedule, planned down to the minute, packed with family obligations and set against the backdrop of Windsor Castle. But something about this particular gathering made Princess Catherine feel uneasy. Over the years, she had learned to trust her instincts, especially when it came to her children. Leave a comment with number 1 and join us as we uncover the royal family's deepest secrets. That day, Charlotte was unusually quiet, not irritable or angry, just withdrawn, as if she were trying to blend into the background. This was completely unlike her. The family had gathered at Windsor Castle for a private lunch, held in honor of one of the Queen Consort's recent charitable initiatives. Occasions like these weren't uncommon, but they brought multiple generations of the royal family together under one roof. Camilla's circle, Catherine's family, and often a mix of extended royals didn't always get along seamlessly. Catherine didn't mind these events, but she was always cautious. While Prince William could comfortably slip into his role, she had to stay alert to everything. That afternoon, Charlotte was asked to join a group of younger royal cousins in a side sitting room. The space was formal enough, but by royal standards, fairly relaxed. The children were expected to behave properly, make polite conversation, and enjoy afternoon tea, while the adults socialized in the main hall. Catherine helped Charlotte to her seat, kissed her forehead, and left the room with one last glance. Everything seemed fine, at least for the moment. But something had changed after that. About 45 minutes into the gathering, Catherine was speaking with a senior courtier when she caught sight of Charlotte walking past an open doorway in the hallway. She wasn't crying, but her face was pale and her lips pressed into a tight, thin line. She looked hurt, not the scraped knee kind of hurt, but something deeper, emotional. Catherine excused herself mid-conversation and followed. She found Charlotte standing alone at the end of the hallway near a service door. The child's hands were tightly clasped in front of her chest, her eyes fixed on the floor. "What happened?" Catherine asked softly. Charlotte hesitated. "Nothing, Mother." But Catherine knelt down to Charlotte's eye level. "I know when something is wrong, dear." Charlotte's voice was soft. "Camilla said you were bragging. She told you not to talk unless asked." Catherine blinked. "When did she say that?" "When I answered a question for Louis," Charlotte said. "We were just playing a guessing game," but she was angry. Catherine didn't respond right away. She pulled Charlotte into a hug, calm on the outside, but inside everything had shifted. She had always tried to maintain peace with Camilla, even if their relationship felt more like a forced dance than a natural bond. Camilla had her own views on hierarchy and decorum, and while she often masked them with a smile, her tone sometimes revealed more than her words. Still, Catherine had believed that the subtle digs and occasional dismissiveness would never be directed at her children. But she had been wrong. Later, Catherine sat beside Charlotte during the family walk through the gardens. Camilla walked ahead arm in arm with King Charles, chatting as if the morning had been entirely without tension. Catherine watched her closely. Now it wasn't just about the comment. It was the fact that Charlotte had felt the need to hide how she was feeling. After the garden walk, the family gathered back inside. Catherine observed everything subtly. At one point, Charlotte reached for a second scone at the buffet table. Camilla turned, glanced down, and said with a half-smile, "Perhaps one is enough, darling. We wouldn't want to appear greedy, would we, once again?" Now Catherine saw it clearly. This wasn't a one-off. It was a pattern. Small moments that on their own might not seem harsh, but when directed repeatedly at the same child, they began to add up. Catherine didn't react right away. She wasn't the type to make a scene, but her silence was always intentional, and now she had every reason not to stay silent any longer. William hadn't noticed anything. He was tied up with Charles and a few senior aides discussing the schedule. But that evening, back at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine would bring it up not as a duchess, but as a mother who could no longer ignore what she had seen. But before that conversation could happen, something else occurred. Catherine didn't enter royal life expecting it to be easy. She understood the responsibilities, the unspoken rules, and the need to maintain a public image while facing the realities behind the scenes. But one thing she would never accept and never tolerate was anyone making her child feel small, especially someone within the family. The moment came just after the tea was cleared away. The adults moved into a sitting room connected to the main exhibition hall, an old routine dating back to the Queen's time. The children were allowed to stay for a while before being taken upstairs by the nanny. Charlotte entered with George and Louis, her expression neutral. She sat by the fireplace, flipping through a book taken from the shelf. At that moment, Camilla walked in holding a glass of water, softly laughing with a long-time aide. She looked cheerful. She saw the children, gave a brief smile, then turned back to the adults. But just minutes later, the laughter faded. George and Louis had moved over to their grandfather, standing beside Charles, while Charlotte remained seated in the armchair. A few minutes later, Charlotte politely asked Camilla, "May I play the piano for a bit?" Camilla turned around. "The piano, yes," Charlotte said. "Just a little softly." Camilla took a sip of water, then looked directly at her. "Darling, that's not necessary. Let the adults have some peace. Why don't you sit still like a proper little lady, not loud, not cruel, but deliberate?" The words were sharp. Charlotte's cheeks flushed red. She quietly closed her book and folded her hands together. Catherine heard it. She was standing nearby talking with Lady Lansdowne. Her eyes shifted from Charlotte to Camilla. She didn't say anything right away, but her gaze lingered longer than usual, and Camilla noticed. Their eyes met for a moment before Camilla looked away. The room carried on. Conversations resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. That night at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine put Charlotte to bed herself. The house was quieter now. William was finishing a call with his private secretary, and George was already asleep. Catherine sat on the edge of Charlotte's bed and asked, "Were you upset today?" Charlotte looked uncertain. "A little, but I'm okay. You don't have to pretend," Catherine said gently. Charlotte nodded. "Granny Camilla doesn't like it when I talk too much." It was the truth, direct and unmistakable. Catherine kissed Charlotte's forehead, stood up, and walked down the hallway. Passing William's study, he looked up. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm trying," Catherine replied. William leaned back in his chair. "What happened?" Catherine told him everything, not angrily, but clearly. She repeated Charlotte's words, then described Camilla's cold remarks, the dismissiveness, and the repeated efforts to diminish Charlotte's presence. William listened without interrupting, but when Catherine finished, his jaw clenched. "We can't just ignore this," she said. "I agree," he replied, "but we'll handle it carefully." The next morning, Catherine decided to keep Charlotte home, skipping the next scheduled event. It was a charity garden project that Camilla had arranged for the royal children. Catherine made the excuse that Charlotte had a mild cold, but the truth was, she didn't want her daughter in that environment any longer, not until she was sure it was safe. The news reached Camilla that Charlotte wouldn't be attending. She said little, just raised an eyebrow when an aide mentioned it. Then she muttered, "Probably too delicate to handle a bit of mud." Catherine heard that too. Royals often say more than they admit. The situation might have ended there, if not for what happened the following weekend. It was a small, private dinner at Highgrove. Charles had invited both William and Catherine, hoping for a relaxed evening. The plan was simple: spend family time, reconnect, and discuss upcoming royal tours. But when Catherine entered the main sitting room with Charlotte, who had only come to say goodnight to her grandfather before bed, things escalated quickly. Camilla barely looked up from her chair by the fireplace. Charlotte entered, offering a polite smile, and said, "Good evening, Granny." Camilla didn't return the smile. Instead, she said, "You're not too tired to be here? I hope it was a thinly veiled jab," and everyone in the room heard it. Catherine's eyes never left Camilla. This time, she didn't wait until afterward. Her silence alone was enough to shift the atmosphere. The polite smile she'd worn upon entering was gone, replaced by something sharper. She turned to Charlotte and said calmly, "Why don't you say goodnight to Grandpa and then head upstairs with Anna?" Charlotte, a little confused, looked at her mother. Catherine nodded gently. The girl walked over to Charles, hugged him, and then left the room with the family nanny. As the door closed, a heavy silence filled the room. Camilla remained seated, still holding her glass of wine. She glanced around, then muttered quietly, "The child's too sensitive, isn't she?" William stiffened. His father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but Catherine stepped forward, choosing her words carefully. "No, she's not too sensitive. She's a child, and she deserves to be spoken to with kindness." Camilla raised an eyebrow. "I didn't mean that. I'm just surprised she's still awake at this hour. There's nothing to be upset about." Catherine didn't blink. "It's not just tonight. This has been happening for weeks. I've heard what's been said to her, and so has she." The room grew colder. Charles tried to intervene. "Darling, perhaps we should—" "No," Catherine cut him off, calm but firm. "If it were just a single comment, we might let it go. But this isn't one time. It's a pattern, and I won't stand by while my daughter is made to feel lesser." Camilla looked to William, hoping he would speak, but he remained silent. His silence spoke louder than words. "I've tried to keep the peace," Catherine continued, "because that's what's expected of me. I've overlooked the off moments. But this is different. This involves Charlotte, and I will not let anyone, no matter who they are, undermine her confidence." Camilla set down her glass of wine and finally leaned forward. "You're reading too much into this," Camilla said. "You always take things too seriously. Children are resilient." Catherine's expression didn't change. Children remember how they are spoken to, especially by those who are meant to protect them. There was no drama. Catherine didn't get angry or raise her voice, but the strength in her tone was undeniable. It was the voice of a mother who had drawn a clear line. William finally spoke up. "We're only asking for basic respect. Charlotte hasn't done anything wrong. She's just being herself. That shouldn't be a problem." Camilla looked to Charles, but he remained silent. He knew better than to intervene. Catherine was drawing a line, and once she had, there was no turning back. After a few tense minutes, Catherine excused herself and left. William followed shortly after. Upstairs, Catherine sat again by Charlotte's bed. This time, she didn't ask if something was wrong. She simply held her daughter's hand. "You haven't done anything wrong," she told Charlotte. "You were polite, you were kind, and that's all I ask of you." Charlotte looked up at her mother. "I tried." "You don't have to try to be perfect," Catherine said. "You just have to be yourself." Downstairs, Charles tried to ease the tension by changing the subject. Camilla said little. She didn't apologize, but she also didn't offer any further justification. That night at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine and William talked in their private room. Catherine remained calm, but the day had clearly worn on her. "She doesn't have to like me," she said, "but she must respect Charlotte. That's non-negotiable." "She will. William replied. "Because we won't let this go on." The days that followed remained polite but different. The next event was Charlotte's school performance at Lambrook, and Catherine decided to invite only close family. Camilla was not invited. The palace cited a scheduling conflict, but those involved knew the true meaning. In the press, nothing changed. Smiling photos were released as usual, showing unity and grace. But behind palace walls, a shift had taken place. Camilla still appeared at major events, but she kept her distance from Charlotte. There were no more offhand remarks, no lingering glances, at least not within Catherine's earshot. But Catherine had drawn a clear line. And even in a family built on centuries of hierarchy and deference, some boundaries cannot be crossed without consequences. However, things were far from settled. Camilla had been warned, but she hadn't forgotten. And the next time the family gathered at Balmoral in the summer, another moment pushed everything to the brink. Balmoral has always been Charles's refuge, a place to breathe, to walk, to think, without the glare of cameras. For decades, it was the late Queen's favorite retreat, and the family still honors that rhythm. Every summer, they gather there. It's tradition. But this year, beneath the fresh Scottish air and peaceful countryside, the mood had shifted. Catherine agreed to come, but with boundaries. She and William brought all 3 children as usual. Yet Catherine made it clear to William that she would never leave Charlotte alone even for a moment with Camilla. Everyone arrived according to the multi-day schedule. Charles was the first to greet them at the estate, arms open and cheerful. He adored his grandchildren and looked forward to spending time with them. Camilla arrived a day later, accompanied by her usual entourage and a carefully selected wardrobe. She had remained silent since the incident at Highgrove. She hadn't spoken directly to Catherine since then, only exchanging brief, formal words at public events. The first few days at Balmoral passed peacefully, long walks, horseback riding, dinners filled with laughter. Charlotte began to relax. Catherine saw her daughter gradually return to herself, chatting animatedly at breakfast, running across the fields with George and Louis, even helping a kitchen staff member bake cakes one afternoon. But then the moment came while Catherine was in the sitting room with Lady Sarah Chatto and a few aides. William had gone fishing with Charles. The children were playing in the garden, supervised by 2 staff members. It was the first time since arriving that Catherine had taken her eyes off them for more than 5 minutes. Then a palace aide leaned in and said, "I believe Princess Charlotte is in the sunroom with the Queen." Catherine froze. She didn't move immediately, but those words echoed in her mind. Without explanation, she excused herself and quickly made her way toward the sunroom. As she approached, she heard 2 voices. One was Camilla's, the other Charlotte's. Catherine paused and listened. "We don't always have to drown out others," Camilla was saying. "What matters is listening. Sometimes your mother forgets that too." Charlotte didn't respond. Catherine opened the door. Camilla looked up, surprised. "I'm looking for you," Catherine said evenly. "I'm looking for you, my dear." Charlotte stood up and walked straight to her mother. "We were just having a conversation," Camilla said, her tone gentle but with a hint of edge. "I heard that," Catherine replied. Camilla raised an eyebrow. "The child was just—" Catherine cut her off, still calm. "The child is just a child, and she doesn't need to be corrected every time she speaks." Camilla crossed her arms. "I've raised children. I know when a girl is growing up too fast for her own good." "The child is growing up just fine," Catherine said firmly, "and she will do so without being made to feel like a problem." There was no yelling, just clarity, the kind that leaves no room for argument. "I want to see more kindness shown around her," Catherine added. That shouldn't be too much to ask. Camilla said nothing. Her silence was calculated. But Catherine no longer cared. She had spent years protecting the institution. Now her focus had shifted to something far more important, protecting her daughter. After they left the room, Catherine knelt beside Charlotte in the hallway. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered. Charlotte nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "You never have to be afraid to speak up," Catherine told her. By the end of the weekend, palace staff noticed that Camilla kept her distance. During meals, she sat farther away from the children. She made no comments about their behavior, clothing, or tone. It was a subtle shift, but in the royal world, subtlety means everything. Catherine didn't explode. She didn't cause a scandal, but her presence drew a boundary no one could cross. Even Charles, who hoped time would ease the tensions, knew better than to intervene. He loved both women dearly, but he understood that when Catherine stood firm, she did so with reason and final resolve. That summer ended with the familiar photos, the family on the castle steps, smiling for the press, waving to supporters. But inside, everything had changed. Camilla had lost what she hadn't realized was slipping away the tolerance Catherine had maintained for the sake of appearances. That tolerance was gone now, and while the world saw a united royal family behind closed doors, a mother had made sure her daughter would never feel small again. Thank you for watching the entire video. Please like and subscribe to support our channel, or secrecy is the foundation of the world's oldest power. For decades, the monarchy guarded its silence until now. A black swan has arrived, a sealed genetic map that shatters history. This isn't a public announcement. It is the precise moment absolute certainty collapses. Princess Anne, the stoic temple guardian, finally cracked. Her rare tears weren't just emotion, they signaled a belief system colliding with an irreversible truth. Before we decode this historic shift, subscribe now. This wasn't a tabloid rumor. The leak bled from the very heart of the royal machine. A flawless system suddenly went dark. Calls were cut. Oak doors slammed. The air at Buckingham Palace wasn't filled with ceremony, but with the suffocating weight of a succession crisis. Everyone in that room knew the stakes. They weren't just facing a document, but the rewriting of history. Reputation can be salvaged, but when science questions the bloodline, there is no retreat. The moment the report touched Anne's hands, the order shattered. Witnesses called it a total collapse of discipline. Her trembling wasn't just nerves, it was the armor cracking. Why would a veteran of political storms unravel over a lab result? Because this wasn't just data. It was the key to a buried secret, validating a dark warning whispered decades ago by Diana herself. Was this fate? Or the final move in a game we were never meant to understand? Diana's letters hid more than pain. They encoded an identity paradox, a flaw in the royal design itself. Anne once dismissed these warnings as paranoia. Now she realizes Diana wasn't venting. She was predicting the future. Whispers are easy to ignore. DNA is not. The physical evidence shattered Anne's composure. Normally, the system neutralizes threats before they surface, but this time the gears jammed. Total paralysis took over. They aren't staying silent out of caution. They are silent because the system has failed. When DNA rewrites history, the rule book burns. Inside the palace, the fear wasn't about managing the media. It was about the collapse of a centuries-old foundation. To understand this panic, we must uncover a secret 1990s pact. Diana the rebel and Anne the guardian, two opposites who should have clashed yet found a dangerous common ground in the shadows. It wasn't politics. It was shared survival. They both saw the hidden fractures in the crown. When the masks dropped, they faced the cold calculation of their reality together. In that silence, a warning was planted, one that became Anne's ghost. Diana wasn't just mourning a broken marriage. She was targeting the bloodline itself, exposing a flaw in a system the world thought was untouchable. That dormant warning has awoken as hard evidence. We are past the point of discovery. Now comes the fallout. If a genetic map can erase a legacy, which side do you choose, the cold facts or the ancient order type 2 for truth? Type 5 for stability. Don't just watch, decide. Like and subscribe now because the next mystery is even darker. Diana didn't name names. She left a system warning. This wasn't fear, it was a calculated failsafe. She rigged the timeline to ensure the truth would eventually surface. From that moment, her bond with Anne became a strategic pact. Through coded notes, they mapped out loops for the next generation's secrets, far too explosive for the monarchy to handle at the time. If the unexpected strikes, you must guard the final data. Diana's whisper wasn't a confession, it was a transfer of command. Anne accepted it as a dark theory only for history to turn it into a crushing, silent burden. Decades passed, but when the cold science of the genetic map surfaced, the truth hit Anne hard. Diana's warnings weren't riddles, they were precise predictions. The ghost has hardened into molecular proof, ready to dismantle the crown's foundation. Even Anne couldn't predict an external variable breaking the royal seal. An unnamed entity ensured this code escaped the dark archives. And the scariest part, this sample didn't come from a doctor's office. It wasn't routine. It was taken. Sources confirm this was Diana's self-preservation algorithm. In her final isolated years, she wasn't seeking medical answers, she was planting proof of identity. Now history collides with science. Marble walls can no longer block genetic truth. Is this a random glitch in the legacy, or is it the inevitable shock the system needs to finally evolve? If you held the key to topple the world's oldest power, what would you choose: eternal silence to keep the peace, or the dangerous road of truth, tell us truth or order? Diana knew she couldn't trust the system. She built a shadow network, a private circle of experts untouchable by the institution. Among them, one specialist crossed the professional line to become a silent witness to history. He saw past the pageantry. He knew the royal machine didn't just preserve history, it rewrote it to ensure survival. Under his watch, a silent biological protocol was executed. This wasn't rebellion, it was information insurance. The sample was vaulted off the grid far beyond the palace's reach, Diana's final defense against a system she could no longer trust. When Paris shattered, the world chaos took over. But Diana's insurance policy didn't trigger instantly, it went underground. The specialist tracked down Anne with a brutal message: the science contradicts the lie. Torn between her vow and the crown's survival, Anne made her choice. She didn't act, she buried it. Anne didn't destroy the data. She buried it. Encrypted in the deepest archive layers, it had no digital footprint, a ghost waiting for its cue. After 20 years of silence, the hidden variable woke up. A source from Diana's inner circle triggered the alarm. They didn't need to leak the full file. They just proved the weapon existed, the protocol, the specialist, and the signatures. That was enough. The hypothesis is dead. We are witnessing an irreversible chain reaction. The data exposes unexplainable anomalies in the very heart of the succession. These aren't random biological glitches. They are cracks in the bloodline. The immutable right to rule is finally being questioned. Science has breached the fortress of tradition, and the crisis is absolute. If a single genetic code can topple a kingdom, do we cleanse the system with truth or bury it to save the symbols secrets have moved from marble tombs to digital encryption? But when that code breaks, the choice is ours. In a transparent world, do we need necessary lies to protect history, or is truth the only legacy worth fighting for? Drop your analysis below, and follow us as we continue to decode the world's most complex systems. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The upper echelons of power didn't just shake, they cracked. Questions of legitimacy are no longer theories, they are weapons rewriting the equation of authority. Every sacred inheritance law is now on trial. The system scrambled to contain the damage and spin the story, but they failed. The leak unleashed a new, unstoppable, sovereign scientific truth. DNA speaks a language no diplomat can silence. The real shock wasn't the data, it was the breakdown. Princess Anne, the axis of discipline, finally shattered. Witnessing the monarchy's strongest pillar tremble behind closed doors proved one thing. This wasn't a political crisis. It was the death of a belief system. The truth didn't break on the news. It broke in the dim silence of her study. This was profoundly personal. Anne wasn't facing a scandal, she was staring at the historical paradox she had spent decades burying. Witnesses described total paralysis. She froze. She refused to speak to Charles or the heirs. That silence was the sound of the family structure snapping. She refused the summary. She demanded the raw evidence. But when her eyes hit the genetic code, the weight was unbearable even for her. Her tears weren't shock, they were recognition. Deep down, she had always felt the aftershock of Diana's warning. What the world called paranoia was now cold, hard science. The prophecy didn't just come true, it arrived with enough force to derail the entire monarchy. When she finally broke her silence to a single confidant, it wasn't just emotion, it was a confession of systemic failure. Her words cut deep. I swore I would protect her, and I failed. This isn't just grief, it's an admission that protocols and loyalty were powerless to save the truth. Anne didn't crack under media pressure. She cracked under the moral weight of realizing that her own silence was the wall blocking justice all along. The delay wasn't caution, it was a fatal error. By keeping the data locked, she let the machine crush the truth. Anne's tears aren't just grief, they represent the weight of her own inaction. But beneath the regret lies a terrifying realization. Her words, "The crown will never recover," aren't emotional hyperbole. They are a cold, hard diagnosis. When DNA disproves the bloodline, the throne loses its anchor. A lie this deep creates a permanent security flaw, one that can never be patched. For decades, the royal machine suppressed these shadows with ritual and protocol. But the genetic variable has ripped the veil away. We are done with whispers. This is the brutal collision of history and hard science. Genetic data does more than expose secrets. It reconstructs the truth. For the powerful, this isn't a media crisis. It is the demolition of the old order. The inquiry into loyalty and science ends here. Marble walls can no longer block the genetic code. A new chapter of history is being written right now in a language that is more objective and colder than ever before. Here is the final question. In a world where science strips secrets bare, can we handle a truth that shatters our reality? Or do we need myths to survive? If you held this report, would you choose disclosure to change the world or suppression to keep the peace? The data is now in the light. A seismic genetic misalignment has been found in the chain of succession. The map of power is about to be redrawn. When power is built on unbroken blood, a single deviation brings the whole structure down. If the genes don't match, the titles are void. This isn't just a legal issue, it is a crisis of institutional authenticity. Inheritance laws, royal decrees, and public trust are all suddenly suspect, and the deeper analysis reveals the terrifying truth. This was not a random accident. Diana didn't act on impulse, she acted on intelligence. Her security was compromised, her calls intercepted. To survive, she built a truth bunker outside the system, a final defense against a history she knew would be rewritten. But her trust had limits. Even Anne, the chosen guardian, was only given half the key. The name of the root variable remains in shadow. Only the warning of its destructive potential for the House of Windsor has endured through time. As these genetic fragments began to erupt into public discourse, this was no longer merely a media scandal. It was a direct assault on the structure of succession itself. Within the corridors of power, chaos spread as strategic advisors confronted a problem with no easy solution. If a single link in the direct line of succession is called into question regarding legitimacy, the entire legal framework that has governed the system thus far enters a state of temporary invalidation. This does not affect only the individuals directly involved. It raises a profound question about the future of the entire institution. Will the system choose purification to preserve the integrity of historical data, or will it attempt to shroud the issue beneath a new layer of diplomatic fog? As foundations once thought immovable begin to tremble under the pressure of empirical truth, the monarchy faces an existential crisis. This is not merely the story of an individual, it is the fracture of a belief system that has endured for centuries. If a single link in the chain of succession is proven to have a genetic misalignment, the entire legal structure and inheritance rules enter a state of invalidation. Silence from the firm is no longer a prudent strategy. It is becoming a catalyst for speculation about systematic deception. As parliamentary corridors begin to whisper about constitutional repercussions, public trust fractures between empathy and sharp scrutiny. While Anne sinks into a collapse of systemic certainty, another figure has emerged from the shadows with a radically different approach. Queen Camilla, in an emergency meeting behind closed doors, did not choose denial or grief. Instead, she displayed a state of strategic resistance. From her perspective, the genetic data was not a truth to be honored, but an information weapon sent from the past. Her remark about the recklessness of the deceased revealed an uncompromising confrontation between two modes of thought. On one side, Anne, with her anguish over an abandoned truth. On the other, Camilla, determined to protect the existing structure at any cost. The tension between the two most powerful figures within the palace erupted into a genuine battle of methodology. One side represented disillusionment and guilt, the other embodied a calculated damage control strategy. Camilla demanded a tight-lipped response, deploying legal instruments and media pressure to smother the leak. The marble walls now enclosed not only ritual, but a battlefield of legal threats and narrative manipulation. The system was attempting to heal itself by isolating the information pathogen, but can a genetic fracture truly be patched over with administrative paperwork? We have witnessed the moment when science, emotion, and power collide head-on. The final secret encoded in blood has not merely altered a lineage, it is raising a generational question about the very survival of institutions founded on heredity. Behind declarations about preserving stability, a strategy of system repositioning is being quietly deployed. The objective is not simply to contain a scandal, but to carry out a permanent data purification aimed at links deemed incompatible with the officially sanctioned bloodline. A leak from the highest advisory levels revealed a pragmatism bordering on cruelty. It is time to stop sustaining hypotheses that are not real. This was not merely a personal remark, it was a signal of an effort to rewrite royal history. According to internal analyses, the public relations apparatus received a top-secret directive recast the genetic data as a product of imagination or part of recycled conspiracy narratives in order to preserve the coherence of the royal storyline. Yet this structure encountered an immovable force: the steadfast resolve of Princess Anne. In a moment described as the breaking point of internal diplomacy, she delivered a sharp declaration. This is not a narrative to be managed. This is the truth. Anne's departure from the meeting, punctuated by the slam of a closing door, marked the end of compromise protocols. For the guardian of tradition, the line between protecting the crown and betraying the truth had officially been crossed. At that moment, the system ceased to be a unified whole and fractured into factions with completely opposing value systems. As internal conflicts reached their peak, the palace's self-defense mechanism completely failed under external pressure. Whispers in the shadows rapidly transformed into blazing headlines across global media. This was the scenario. The firm feared most the truth was no longer within their control. As genetic maps were dissected by data analysts and the press alike, a wall of protection built over centuries collapsed in a matter of hours. Headlines about the Windsor bloodline and the DNA variable sent shockwaves across every digital platform. Now the story is no longer guided by royal statements, but by the relentless scrutiny of a global public. The question of bloodline legitimacy is no longer an internal matter. It has become an open investigation for all humanity. Every expert, every biographer, and every observer is constructing their own interpretation from the fragments of leaked data. The palace's silence is no longer a display of authority, it is a sign of paralysis in the face of an undeniable reality. We are witnessing a rare historical moment when genetic secrets become powerful enough to pierce the most fortified layers of a monarchy. This conflict is not merely between individuals, but between the value of truth and the duty to preserve the institution. Now we invite you to exercise your own analytical judgment. Can the crown survive in an era of absolute transparency, or are we witnessing the unraveling of a long-standing myth? Leave your perspective below, and don't forget to subscribe to follow the next developments in this explosive investigation. When the walls of silence were breached, the outside world applied immense pressure. Questions about the coherence of the succession system and bloodline variables were no longer confined to closed rooms. Media outlets began running algorithmic deep dives into the past, turning historical ghosts into direct weapons against present-day credibility. Amid this data storm, Princess Anne unexpectedly became the focal point of a generational debate. One side views her as a guardian of truth, while the other sees her as a link that allowed a system error to persist for far too long. In an era where subtlety has been replaced by the speed of dissemination, Anne has become the focal point of a structure in fracture. The true detonation of this chain of events originated from an unreleased root data source, a leaked portion of Diana's private diary. These were not merely pages of writing, they constituted a truth matrix recorded during her final months. References to a bloodline secret provided the public with the final pieces needed to complete the timeline and understand the motivations behind the unfolding events. When these data points were finally linked together, the palace's conventional diplomatic protocols became useless. Internal pressure reached an alarming level as figures within the system began to panic in search of an exit. Under advisors' pressure to issue an information patch, a denial statement, Anne made a shocking choice to end the cover-up. Her assertion, "There will be no more data distortion," transformed the monarchy's long-standing silence into a devastating blow to its very structure. At this point, the illusion of a fully unified system completely shattered. Constitutional experts were summoned daily to address variables threatening the survival of the crown. Inside, there was chaos born of contradictory decisions. Outside, an uncompromising demand for transparency. Anne stood at the eye of the storm where every pressure and every old promise collided at full force. Yet this was still not the end. In a move that overturned every rule of royal governance, Princess Anne took a step that no strategist had anticipated. She appeared before the cameras not as a symbol of power shielded by ritual, but as an individual confronting the truth. It was a shift from royal protocol to responsibility to truth, a final act of facing a reality that no marble wall could conceal any longer. The moment Anne stepped into view will be remembered as a fracture point in traditional history. There were no blaring trumpets, no ceremonial escort of courtiers, only a solitary figure fully shedding the mantle of the steadfast temple guardian. In her hands was not a censored administrative document, but a relic of truth, a crumpled letter from Diana, one that had haunted the system like a ghost for more than 2 decades. As the cameras captured the image, Anne began to speak. Her voice was not that of an institution, but of a human being tormented by prolonged silence. She did not begin with justification. She began by confronting the variables head-on. With a painful steadiness, Anne confirmed what the system had long sought to conceal. The genetic report was an objective reality. She admitted that fragments of truth had been entrusted to her by Diana in her final days, but that at the time she chose to prioritize structural stability over data transparency. Her confession carried the weight of a belated awakening. I mistakenly believed that burying a variable would protect the integrity of the entire architecture. But truth has no expiration date. It merely waits for the moment to reclaim its right to exist. In that instant, millions of watching hearts felt the shattering of a royal illusion, giving way to a stark, unadorned reality. The climax of Anne's address came when she broke every convention of lineage to reach the core of humanity itself. Looking straight into the camera, she delivered a direct message to the central figure of the storm, offering a new definition. One that drew a clear and deliberate line between a genetic map and an emotional legacy. She affirmed blood may define a line of succession, but empathy and love are what define a family. This act was not merely a gesture of consolation, it was a restructuring of values at the very heart of a system historically built solely on bloodline. Its impact was immediate, sending shockwaves across the globe, not through outrage, but through an unprecedented depth of empathy. That moment resonated far beyond the boundaries of an ordinary speech, becoming a seismic shift in how legacy itself was understood. For the first time in the modern era, the public was no longer observing a symbolic entity. They were confronting an act of existential authenticity. Anne chose to break through traditional barriers in favor of a universal truth. The wave of response was not merely support, but a redefinition of admiration itself. From the most exacting critics to the general public, all recognized this as the most powerful moment of humanization in the long history of monarchy. Anne had shifted the narrative, entirely transforming a data crisis, a DNA scandal, into a revolution of sincerity. Before leaving the podium, Anne left behind a principle that will be quoted for centuries to come, a manifesto on the balance between power and truth. Truth may generate tremors that shake the crown, but it is the very adhesive that strengthens the foundation of a nation. The silence that followed was not emptiness, but the sound of a system standing at a strategic breaking point, a state in which old rules no longer apply, and every path forward demands an unavoidable reckoning. A family was changed forever, not by external pressure, but by internal courage. Yet as Anne stepped down, a new chapter opened with the most critical variable of all King Charles III. Facing an institution in flux and mounting questions about the coherence of the bloodline, the monarch now confronts a decision that will define his reign. Will he choose to continue the conservative protocols of the firm, or will he follow the path of transparency his sister has opened? This is not merely a personal choice. It is a question of whether a 1,000-year-old legacy can survive in the information age. The greatest question now no longer lies in genetic numbers, but in the response of the apex of power. Will the monarch choose to deny objective reality or accept the historical reckoning that Diana set in motion decades ago? Behind stone walls, the silence surrounding King Charles has become a terrifying pause. The cancellation of public engagements and the postponement of ceremonies are not merely personal retreats. They signal a paralysis of the entire representative machinery. Behind closed doors, a governance tragedy is unfolding. Charles is being torn between two opposing forces, the pragmatic faction led by Queen Camilla and a circle of seasoned advisors urging an immediate campaign of legal damage control to erect a barrier between the crown and the consequences of the DNA variable. And the legacy faction echoes from the past and the sincerity of Anne's confession, where the ghost of Diana is no longer merely a memory, but has become a shaping coefficient for the future of the reign. Charles is not merely confronting a personal crisis. He stands at the threshold of what can be called the entropy of the institution, a state in which old rules no longer possess the strength to hold a fracturing structure together. A shift in power has begun to surface through secret meetings with Prince William. Held late at night and entirely removed from advisory staff, these discussions carry the character of future reconstruction. According to system-level analyses, these are no longer ordinary father-son conversations. These were dramatic, contradictory, and at times explosive debates over how to maintain the crown when its very foundation has shifted. They are attempting to design a new protocol for an era in which truth can no longer be permanently sealed away. King Charles now stands before an entirely new map of reality. Every step he takes from here will determine whether the monarchy adapts in order to survive or collapses under the weight of secrets brought into the open. In your view, in the confrontation between institutional stability and the transparency of truth, which side will ultimately prevail? This content is purely for reference based on unverified hypotheses and public speculation. We approach it from an objective, analytical perspective. Join me in decoding this mysterious picture together. Press 1 if you want to continue digging into unexplored and undisclosed angles. Press 0 if you believe in the absolute self-protective mechanisms of the royal institution. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next shocking developments in the series Truth Behind the Veil. Thank you for accompanying us. See you at the next variant. In systems theory, any entity, when abruptly separated and then suddenly returning, generates an impulse that alters the entire existing structure. 3 words that no one in positions of power wants to hear. Right now, Harry is back. After cycles of self-imposed exile and the eruption of opposing streams of information, the sudden appearance of a detached fragment in London is far from merely a media event. From an investigative perspective, this is not a social visit or a routine diplomatic ritual. Could we be witnessing the beginning of a heritage decryption? A mission driven by historical data, obscured for decades, pieces that the system has tried to secure to maintain the stability of the monarchy. The moment the private jet touched down on the runway at RAF Northolt, a gray zone of information began to spread. No ceremonies, no smiles for the cameras. This presence carried the character of a discreet system intrusion. The unusual increase in royal security around Clarence House, unexplained and sudden, is a reflexive instinct of the institution in response to an unpredictable variable. Why has silence become the palace's primary tool at this moment? In information analysis, silence is rarely a lack of data. Rather, it is a tactic to control cracks that are slowly emerging. Harry no longer appears as a lost individual. Instead, he embodies an aura of absolute consistency. No defiance, no anger, but the assurance of someone who holds a crucial key, one capable of rewriting the entire script that the system has long maintained. Behind closed doors, senior officials seem to be facing a ghost from the past. Decisions once considered essential to protect the crown are now suddenly becoming fragile. As the truth begins to leak through the cracks of the power structure, how will the entire system react to prevent a chain reaction of collapse? This comeback is not spontaneous. It feels like the fateful intersection point, where events that began years ago have finally reached a point of collision. Has Harry discovered a truth powerful enough to break even the oldest security protocols? We stand at a historical crossroads. Is this the final attempt at transparency, or the beginning of a new chapter where heritage secrets will no longer be the most secure protective barrier? What is your hypothesis? 1. Did Harry return to seek genuine reconciliation under new conditions? 2. Or did he bring with him a truth key that would force the system to change permanently? Share your analysis in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to follow the second half of this investigation, where we'll unravel what's really behind the whispers at the palace. Those who believe Harry is merely seeking attention must confront a completely different reality. He didn't return to relive the past, but to reconciliation with it. As the palace walls seemed to hold their breath, a disturbing theory began to spread. What if Harry's entire belief system about his identity had been meticulously orchestrated from the very beginning? Internal sources from Highgrove Manor revealed the existence of a sealed file bearing an identifier, Operation Guardian. This is not part of a royal ceremony, but appears to be a security protocol never before published. The appearance of this file, bearing the late Queen's coat of arms and linked to Charles Windsor's name just weeks after the 1997 Paris attacks, opened a rift in Harry's identity structure. Inside that file, the most haunting element wasn't the administrative documents, but a handwritten letter from a woman who had long been silent. Diana, from a strategic analysis perspective, this letter contains not only emotions, but also a blueprint. System alert. Diana seemed to have foreseen a scenario being constructed behind her back, a mechanism designed to shield her youngest son from a truth she believed he deserved to face when the time was right. The reaction from the royal legal apparatus was immediate and forceful. An attempt to block the flow of information was launched, but it seemed too late. Harry, with cold certainty, issued a landmark statement: "I have the right to know, and now the whole world will know too." This is not anger, but a re-establishment of ownership over a personal history that has been manipulated. This investigation leads us to a complex network of secret guardians. A chilling entry was discovered in Princess Anne's personal diary in 2003. The exile pact must remain in effect. He must not know about it. The big question here is, what did they agree to expel him from? Anne, the embodiment of steadfastness, now appears as a guardian of the crown's deepest truths. William's quiet involvement and Camilla's stabilization role further reinforce the hypothesis of a coordinated effort to maintain the current structure at all costs. Every diplomatic smile now seems a protective shell for a silent agreement. It has existed for 2 decades. We are faced with a paradox of truth and loyalty. As the layers of Operation Guardian are gradually peeled away, the picture of British royal stability is being subjected to unprecedented pressure. What is your hypothesis? 1. Are these secrets necessary tools to protect the survival of the throne? 2. Or is transparency the only remedy to mend the rifts in the brotherly and fatherly relationships? Please leave a comment with the number. If you believe that the truth needs to be revealed in its entirety or number. If you believe there are secrets that are best left undisturbed in order to maintain the integrity of the institution. Press like and subscribe to the channel. Join us in our in-depth investigation into the power dynamics hidden behind the glitz and glamour. In an institution where survival depends on legitimacy, stability is not just a goal, but a tactic for navigating the flow of information. From a systems analysis perspective, we see a persistent effort to protect the concepts of lineage matrix and bloodline heritage. In 2019, an information hygiene protocol was activated to divert international press attention away from DNA theories. The goal was clear: to prevent a crisis of confidence that could turn royal standards into an uncontrolled topic of discussion. Beyond just media coverage, legal barriers have been erected to delay any investigation into the transparency of succession documents. All requests for data access are denied under the guise of privacy protection, but in reality, this is how the system protects its resources. Breakpoint, his most sensitive moments. However, the truth often finds a way to emerge through silences. The most devastating shock for Harry didn't come from legal obstacles, but from a symbolic silence. In the final days of Queen Elizabeth II, a final covenant was made. Every senior member received a sealed letter of blessing except for Harry. Was this exclusion a mistake, or the final consolidation of the covenant of silence? Long-standing for Meghan, this is an unmistakable signal Harry has been turned into a pawn in a large-scale preservation strategy. Throughout the years of conflict and exile, the chaos we see is actually a meticulously orchestrated scenario to conceal a fundamental truth. One that leads directly to the most powerful figure today, King Charles. In an isolated area of Balmoral Castle, where secrets are usually kept hidden by the stillness of the forest, a fateful dialogue unfolds. Now standing face to face with his father, the highest guardian of the system, Harry asks for a resolution. Absolute exposure. No assistance, no media, only the truth, and irreparable cracks remained. In that private room, the tension built up by decades of avoidance reached a breaking point. King Charles, his voice heavy with regret and resignation, seemed to have acknowledged something that shattered every piece of his identity Harry had ever held. It was no longer a family conversation. It was a moment that life script. The story of a prince is completely torn apart, revealing a naked reality behind the velvet curtain. Finally, all the masks were removed. The existence of the Highgrove files, codenamed Operation Guardian. And the haunting letter from Diana has been officially confirmed. Charles doesn't deny it. He admits to having approved it from the very beginning. From a systems analysis perspective, this is an attempt to establish a hypothetical safe zone to protect Harry from psychological trauma. However, for Harry, this wasn't protection, but a battle. Denying the right to self-determination and individual identity in a systematic way. The burden of the accusation, "You have chosen duty over truth," now hung like a knife cutting into the foundations of the dynasty. Charles, in a state of profound shock, attempted to explain the impossible. The post-Diana era was a time when the royal institution fell into a serious operational crisis. To preserve it, system integrity, and with the line of succession so fragile, a special arrangement was implemented, a scenario Diana had vehemently opposed during her lifetime. The king's silence in response to the question, "Am I part of the plan?" that is the most accurate answer. In the world of symbols of power, individuals are sometimes merely pawns in a larger-scale survival strategy. The meeting at Balmoral did not end with a solution, but with a resolution. Tactical retreat. Harry walked away, leaving behind a king haunted by the very secrets he had once so painstakingly guarded. The portraits of Diana were covered up at Clarence House, not out of disrespect, but as a manifestation of a psychological pressure of inheritance. That's too much. However, the final variable lies in a rebellious act from the mother's past. Diana's voice, frozen in recordings and handwritten letters, was unearthed from an ancient, secure safe. The message was simple: "To my son, if they ever try to silence you." This shows that Diana had anticipated this confrontation decades in advance. She had established the last line of defense. For Harry, an information loop is only opened when the system attempts to control him again. Diana has always lived in fear of her being erased and her memories reshaped by power structures. But she managed to establish one fail-safe backup mechanism for the future. The recording begins with words carrying the weight of thousands of unshed tears, an echo from the past, affirming that the system has failed to bury the truth. She spoke not as a royal symbol, but as an instinctive protector. Diana presented a chillingly detailed theory about a systematic strategy aimed at severing the emotional connection between her and her sons. This is an attempt to controlling the flow of emotional data, minimizing her influence to preserve the institution's image at all costs. Diana's whispered words, "They thought you wouldn't ask anything, but I knew you would." This officially broke the silence in Harry's mind. A name not found in official records, yet clearly present through subtle hints: bloodline. This not only shook the very foundations of identity Harry had accepted, but it was also the ultimate liberation. The instincts that had been keeping Harry awake all this time weren't delusions, but rather the echo of truth, which his mother had sealed away, waiting for this very moment. For Harry, this was no longer a confirmation of pain, but freedom. A freedom not controlled by any royal script. With Diana's words still echoing in his ears, Harry made a choice that shook the very foundations of the monarchy. A 72-hour ultimatum. It was sent directly to the king's private secretary. This is not a threat, but a challenge. Public reconciliation. Either the system must reveal the truth itself, or Harry will be the one to lift the curtain. This single, strategically significant email has put the royal press office in a precarious situation. Systemic chaos. The palace walls no longer whispered, but roared in the face of the most explosive confrontation in modern history. Within, the power struggle of the dynasty time was no longer on the side of the gatekeepers. Control over the flow of information had officially shifted from the institution to Harry. A frequency collision. A heated argument ensued between the two heirs. William, in a last-ditch effort to protect the stability of the system, attempted to trigger emotional barriers from the past. However, Harry responded with a cold conviction: "The system chose duty over my identity." This is no longer a personal debate, but a refusal to compromise of an entity that has seen through the entire operating mechanism of the organization. Behind that decisiveness is Meghan, who plays the role of a strategic catalyst. After a long period of silence, she urged Harry to undertake a mission. Anatomy of the past thoroughly. The goal is not revenge, but to unleash the system to reclaim her true identity. Meanwhile, Camilla is present in a state of defensive chaos. Her attempts to establish a legal wall to silence this variable completely failed in the face of King Charles's exhaustion. The king's whispered words, "It's too late." This was an admission of the collapse of all the oldest security barriers. The Windsor institution was paralyzed, with half attempting to appease public opinion and the other half holding their breath in the face of a crisis. The heritage has been distorted. It's about to be revealed. Harry wasn't just planning a typical press release, he was orchestrating a whole new one: media revolution. In an unprecedentedly bold statement, Harry broke all royal protocol. He directly connected with the public through digital platforms, without intermediaries, without censorship, and without a script crafted by PR professionals. This was a significant move, direct decoding. He sent it to millions, exposing the secrets that had haunted him for years. Harry wasn't looking for a sensational headline. He was undertaking a mission. Verify the facts. On a large scale, it asserted that the world deserves to hear what really happened behind the glamorous velvet curtain. Harry no longer held back any reservations. He began with a statement breaking decades of silence. "They lied to me and they lied to you all." From an investigative perspective, this is a case system audit, the most public in history. Harry exposed the entire structure of Guardian campaign, the coded entries in Anne's diary, and especially Diana's message from the afterlife. The message, "My mother has always just wanted me to be free." It resonated across continents, transforming an internal secret into a shared human pain. The truth was no longer confined within the walls of Balmoral. It had become the property of the public. In just a few hours, the digital world exploded in a revolution. Global payments. Hashtags such as Royal Reckoning. Good justice for Harry. It's not just a media trend, but an expression of a movement demanding transparency. However, the palace's reaction is what's most shocking: 24 hours of absolute silence. In communication theory, this silence is called a risky, strategic vacuum. The lack of rebuttal or statement is tacit confirmation of the existence of the forbidden protocols that the royal family has long feared. The institution, once proud of its stability, is now facing a profound crisis of confidence, where old rituals are no longer sufficient to conceal internal rifts. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered not to protest in the usual way, but to establish a new order of trust. The banners tell the truth, and Diana deserves to be treated better. This demonstrates how Diana's legacy transformed from personal pain into a driving force for systemic change. This is not just Harry's story. It's a lesson about the price of silence and the collapse of old values before the unfiltered power of truth. A deep crack has formed at the very core of the monarchy, a crack that directly threatens the very survival of the Windsor kingdom in the new era. Within the power structure of the kingdom, the emergence of a transparency variable from Harry has created a powerful counter-impact on William, a figure previously considered the central pillar of stability. Behind that resolute exterior lies a struggle, a civil war of the mind, caught between loyalty to the institution and the pain of fractured trust. For the first time in years, the heir to the throne undertook a mission: tactical retreat away from the front lines of defense. The abrupt cancellation of public routes and the establishment of a zone of silence at Anmer Hall was not merely a personal break, but a sign of system paralysis. In that isolated space, William is confronted with a grim paradox. Is the organization he has dedicated his life to protecting truly the one that orchestrated the manipulative schemes against his loved ones? The climax of this crisis lies in the decision to implement a campaign. Data audit. Most aggressively, William demanded direct access to the original files of Guardian campaign. This is the moment when the guardian of the institution decides to confront the forbidden data zones himself. Sitting alone amidst Diana's past footage and Harry's current statements, William seems to be undergoing a process. Psychological restructuring, profound. What was recorded in that sealed file became a life-changing variable, shaking all the values he had once considered fundamental. When the key to the truth is revealed to the heir, his silence is no longer a defense, but a preparation for a confrontation. Redefining heritage, an action that could permanently alter the future structure of British royal power. The tension was now undeniable. The man trained to endure in silence was beginning to face a systemic crossroads. For the first time, William, in the eyes of observers, seemed to be questioning whether the price of maintaining the regime's stability was exceeding acceptable limits. Not just for Harry, but for the entire family structure upon which this institution relies for survival. He understood perfectly what the system expected: stability, absolute loyalty, and above all, disciplined silence. However, alongside that expectation, another layer of consciousness was supposedly emerging. Not the consciousness of an heir, but of a son, a brother carrying memories that had never truly closed. From a psychological systemic analysis perspective, this was the moment when individual identity began to clash with predetermined roles. Some indirect sources suggest that William is not merely reacting, but is calculating, not with impulsive emotions, but with cautious, deliberate steps. And that's what makes the internal atmosphere more unpredictable than ever. The hypothesis is that the next decision, if any, will not stem from the title, but from memory. From the image of a mother who once tried to speak up in a system that was unaccustomed to listening. When two brothers stand on opposite sides of the same history, the entire structure around them is forced to pause and observe. In large systems, turning points rarely come with noise. They usually come from a quiet but irreversible choice. And then, according to recorded signs, the monarchy's reaction emerges. Not in the form of punishment nor exclusion, instead a move that surprises many an offer powerful enough to become the new glue or the catalyst for complete collapse. A few days after Harry's speech, which sparked widespread global interpretation, a secret message was delivered, not through the press, not through public legal channels, but through a personal envoy. The letter bore the official seal, but its tone was unusual, unceremonious, not commanding merely a proposal for a private dialogue away from the spotlight and the chaos. To some, this might be seen as a signal to de-escalate tensions. To others, it raises questions about a familiar delaying tactic. According to various theories, the family's reaction was not uniform. There is caution resistance and the memory of previous dialogues that failed to bring about substantive change. What makes this moment different from an analytical perspective is not the content of the letter, but the context. When an individual is no longer seeking approval but clarity, every invitation takes on a different meaning. Is this an opportunity for a genuine restructuring of the relationship, or merely a last-ditch effort by a system seeking to maintain control of the narrative? And if that dialogue does take place, who will truly listen, and who will confront the issues that have been delayed for so long? Speculation about the king's health began to surface as noise in a system designed to shield information. According to circulating theories, the prolonged pressures of his role, sleepless nights, and a series of urgent meetings may have led him to reflect more deeply on time and his legacy. There were whispers that he himself had carefully chosen the words in the letter, not as a command, but as a final message to be delivered, while the opportunity still remained. Under the lens of systemic analysis, this was not a sign of weakness, but rather a reflex of a structure facing its own limitations. The proposed conditions were audaciously minimalist. A private meeting between the two brothers, no staff, no press, no recording equipment, just the people and the distance that needed to be faced. After days of deliberation, the agreement was reached not out of optimism, but out of the realization that the longer the unspoken words lingered, the more fragile the system became. Those around them maintained a cautious attitude. Protectiveness and wariness went hand in hand, but everyone sensed a subtle shift, like the wind changing direction before a storm. Behind closed walls, discussions began to emerge. Not about protocol, but about the possibility of restructuring for a different era, one where difficult acknowledgments, unconventional meetings, and decisions once considered impossible were put on the table. Some advisors presumably considered contingency plans, not redefining right and wrong, but repositioning roles, seeing Harry as a potential contributor to the future rather than a symbol of division. Yet this was not reconciliation. Not yet. It was a fragile balance where an ill-considered remark could shatter what had just been rebuilt. But for the rare occasion in years, the two sides entered the same space not as adversaries, but as a family trying to listen to each other. That family was fractured, yet still connected, albeit thinly. Then a final piece of information emerged, a short, anonymous statement from a senior aide. No context, no explanation, just a single line that made observers and constitutional experts pause to ponder. If Harry had returned, perhaps not in the usual way. The story thus continued to unfold, with truths to be examined, relationships to be mended, and secrets to be approached only through questioning. The content you've just watched is for reference only, built from hypotheses, analytical perspectives, and unverified public opinions. It is not an official statement or conclusion. The goal of this video is to open a space for objective discussion where everyone can think and evaluate based on their own reasoning. Now it's your turn to speak. Press 1 if you are curious about the hypotheses presented. Press 0 if you remain skeptical and want to wait for clearer evidence. Don't forget to like and subscribe to continue peeling back the layers of information behind the curtain of silence, where the truth only emerges when we dare to ask questions. The frame is static, perfect. The most distinguished members of the lineage arranged in flawless order, but notice that single accent of color. That attire wasn't just a choice, it was a statement intended to seize the spotlight. However, if you look past the silk and focus on the symbol of power at the very top, you'll see the cracks. A subtle tremor is about to shake the stone walls of Buckingham. What has been referred to as the Crown Incident is not merely a dispute over jewelry. According to systems analysts, it represents a collision between inherited tradition and the desire to assert present-day authority. Notably, the response from the first in line to the throne, William, is precisely the factor that has caused the palace's once solid structure to begin showing fractures invisible to the naked eye. By late October, the atmosphere within the palace no longer retained its customary stillness. It transformed into a massive machine operating at maximum capacity, preparing for two highly symbolic events, the Booker Prize ceremony and the monarch's birthday milestone. Within this context, observers noted a direct and decisive intervention from the Queen. She did not limit herself to a coordinating role. Rather, she appeared intent on re-establishing the aesthetic order of the entire space, from rare flowers sourced across borders to exquisitely crafted Italian fabrics. In a world governed by symbols, such perfectionism is often understood as an attempt to lock in control. Just when everything seemed to be placed exactly where it belonged, an unexpected gap emerged within the symbolic archive, the crown. Why could a single piece of jewelry cause such profound disruption? In royal systems analysis, each crown functions as a source code of history and hierarchy. The choice of which object appears before the public is a silent declaration of the wearer's position within the flow of time. The deadlock arose when the existing options failed to meet the visual demands of two critical events. Older pieces were deemed incompatible with the new language of color, and it was precisely at the intersection of this impasse and the need to assert authority that a pivotal decision was made. The gaze of preference shifted toward a collection long associated with the image of the Princess of Wales, Kate. On the evening of November 4th, beneath the dim golden lights of history-laden corridors, a meeting took place. The object in question was the Oriental Circle, a jewelry masterpiece steeped in deep hereditary significance and long regarded as a symbol intrinsically tied to Kate's elegance. The hypothesis raised here is this. Was it merely a temporary request to reallocate an asset for shared aesthetic purposes, or was it a signal of a deeper shift in the internal rules governing priority and privilege? A negotiation over symbols had begun, yet the manner in which it unfolded, silent and heavy with pressure, set an unprecedented precedent. Within the hushed stillness of the palace corridor, the exchange between the two central figures was far more than a discussion about accessories. It was a collision between present authority and future design. The Queen, her tone composed, yet carrying the weight of absolute power, put forward a proposition meant to assert control. In response, the Princess of Wales chose to defend systemic order and the meticulous preparation she had established. But when arguments of aesthetic logic were brushed aside, a new lens came into focus, the lens of status. The phrase "don't forget who I am" was not merely a reminder of title, but a message aimed at reasserting the hierarchy of priorities within the royal system. Here, respect for procedure collided head-on with the steel wall of supreme authority. Buckingham Palace the following morning was no longer a smoothly operating machine. The whispers circulating through the corridors were clear signs of informational turbulence. When lower-level staff witnessed fractures forming at the very top, confidence in established norms of conduct began to erode. The peak of the disruption unfolded at the very heart of the royal treasury, the repository of priceless legacies. The arrival of security personnel and designers acting in the Queen's name without the princess's consent triggered a crisis of authorization protocol. This was no longer a routine working session but a unilateral campaign of asset requisition. The reaction of the officer guarding the treasures stood as a representation of the conscience of tradition. The question of Catherine's consent was a final attempt to preserve the boundaries of hereditary protocol. However, the cold response, "Catherine is not the Queen," put a definitive end to any debate over ownership. In the realm of supreme symbols, the needs of the one at the top are regarded as the command of the crown, overriding all personal arrangements and individual dignity. When the Oriental Circle crown, an emblem of refinement and legacy, was lifted from its familiar place, a true shift in power was completed within the shadows of the royal treasury. This event left behind a heavy atmosphere where Catherine's silence and William's decisive reaction appear to be preparing the ground for a new undercurrent of upheaval. When the rules of respect and hierarchy are stretched to their absolute limits, can the palace's structure still maintain its inherent stability? In a system where symbols equal power, will the prioritization of personal authority or the protection of hereditary order determine the survival of royal prestige? And if it were, would you stand with the current order or with the continuity of the future? And if it were you, would you stand with the current order or with the continuity of the future? Leave your opinion in the comments by pressing 2 if you support absolute adherence to royal authority, or 5 if you believe mutual respect among members is the core value. If these systems-based analyses have given you a fresh and deeper perspective on the mysteries behind Buckingham's velvet curtain, don't forget to hit like to support us. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our upcoming investigative reports, where we continue to decode the power source codes reshaping the royal world day by day. It did not stop at a single artifact. The requisition expanded to encompass the very core symbols most closely associated with the image of the Princess of Wales. First came the Cambridge Lover's Knot, a creation infused with the breath of the past, once tied to the memory of Diana, and now a defining hallmark of Kate. Next was the lotus flower tiara, a symbol of grace and refinement. The simultaneous transfer of all 3 treasures out of Kate's sphere of stewardship, placed under the Queen's temporary authority, could no longer be dismissed as a mere technical coincidence. Analysts suggest that this was a strategy of a full-scale assault on the image archive, designed to blur the personal imprint of the heir during major ceremonial moments. News of the disappearance of these symbols reached Catherine at 4:30 p.m., the moment when the quiet of her private room was broken by the arrival of John Harrington, the keeper of the Royal Treasury keys. The tension visible in Harrington's demeanor stood as evidence of a system slipping out of sync. When the rules of consent were pushed aside, a fundamental question came sharply into focus: who truly holds the authority to determine the fate of royal legacies? Catherine's reaction, a silence charged with tension before erupting into a softly spoken yet sharply pointed question, revealed that she recognized this was no longer a mere procedural misunderstanding, but a direct challenge to her position. Catherine chose not to remain silent. Her advance into the Queen's private office was an act that broke the usual restraint. Within a room teeming with witnesses from aides to designers, a debate over boundaries and power erupted. When Catherine invoked the concepts of respect and protocol, she was defending the long-standing operational structure of the palace. In contrast, Camilla's response, "I take them because I can," was a declaration of the supreme authority of the reigning monarch. In this system, power requires no explanation, it demands only execution. Catherine's statement. This will never be forgotten was not merely a personal warning, but a signal that a subtle shift within the heart of the royal family had officially begun. As night fell, a veneer of silence enveloped the palace. Yet it was precisely at this moment that a new player emerged, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, the keeper of the most sensitive internal information. Eleanor's hesitation over a message from the wardrobe team hinted at a larger scheme being orchestrated behind the scenes. Was there something about the crowns being removed that went beyond mere decoration? Could a physical restructuring or even a political message have been embedded within the act? The story of the crown is evolving from an internal dispute into a full-blown crisis of succession and trust. Will Eleanor Whitmore's appearance serve as the key to decoding the mystery, or is it merely the beginning of a deeper fracture? In the world of thick stone walls, no secret is absolute. Information decoded from the wardrobe team revealed a shocking truth. The lotus flower tiara, a highly symbolic and cherished item, was not being requisitioned for the reigning monarch. Internal reports suggested that it was being prepared for an entity outside the official royal system. Assigning a national treasure for the personal use of those without monarchical responsibility constitutes a serious protocol breach. For Catherine, this was no longer a mere dispute over jewelry. It was a violation of the core values of integrity and hereditary protocol. A subtle message had been sent that traditional boundaries were being challenged by personal priorities. When these fundamental values are compromised, the consequences extend beyond confrontations. They seep into the most private spaces of the family. The sensitivity of the next generation, George and Charlotte, serves as the most precise barometer of the pressures Catherine is enduring. Through an analytical lens, the silence and chill of the palace that night represented the cost of maintaining dignity. Catherine chose not to respond with an outburst of anger, but with strategically measured endurance. Yet a deeply personal humiliation had left a fracture that no diplomatic procedure could easily erase. But systems always have self-correcting mechanisms. The following morning, a new current of energy spread through the corridors, signals of the earlier-than-expected return of Prince William and Princess Anne. Within the power structure, this was seen as the emergence of traditional protective forces. Their return carried not only emotional significance, but also strategic weight aimed at restoring the disrupted order. For Catherine, William's presence was more than comfort. It represented the hope for a systemic recovery where boundaries and respect could be properly reinstated. The moment Catherine picked up the phone to call William, his warm voice on the other end served as a balm amidst the brewing undercurrent. Yet the question remained, would this return possess enough force to reverse decisions that had already been executed? Or would it instead mark the beginning of a larger direct confrontation between two generations of power at Buckingham? In a strictly hierarchical system, information is often a weapon, but at times it becomes a form of artificial sedative. The confirmation of the mix-up regarding William's return date was not merely a scheduling mishap. From a systems psychology perspective, it was a forced pause. Catherine faced the reality that her safest anchor remained out of reach, leaving her isolated in the eye of the storm created by broken rules. Restraint and royal dignity were no longer options. They had become a heavy suit of armor, gradually draining the wearer's strength. On November 7th, the arrival of William and Princess Anne acted like an electric jolt, reactivating the palace's energy network. The laughter of the children and the presence of their protective figures temporarily masked the fractures at the base of the stone walls. However, discerning observers would notice that Catherine's smile, though genuine, was only a temporary solution. The system might appear stable on the surface, but when the clamor of duties subsides, the truth still waits in the most private corners. A dialogue of crisis decryption was about to begin. In the private room, the only space where protocol could not intrude, the calm that Catherine had painstakingly maintained began to unravel. William, with the intuition of a future head of state, immediately recognized the structural cracks etched on his wife's face. What Catherine shared was far more than a personal story. It was a report on a breach of authority. Recounting Camilla's demands, the way words were wielded to diminish her position, and ultimately the requisition of the 3 crowns without approval, all painted a portrait of a silent yet decisive symbolic coup. The 3 crowns that were taken were more than priceless pieces of jewelry. In the language of power, this was an act of erasing the presence of the heir. Executing it in William's absence demonstrated a calculated timing designed to maximize the target's vulnerability. Catherine was not merely recounting the loss of objects. She was narrating the erosion of trust and the respect for boundaries, 2 pillars that uphold the royal structure against the pressures of personal ambition. The dialogue in the darkness of the private room closed the first half of the crisis, but it opened a new chapter: William's resistance. With the protective system now activated, Buckingham Palace was set to witness a confrontation between 2 generations of power, more pronounced than ever. What do you think the simultaneous removal of the 3 crowns signifies? Comment if you believe it was an act asserting the Queen's ultimate ownership over all royal legacies. Want to explore William's dramatic reaction when facing Camilla the following morning? Hit follow, and we'll return with the most exclusive analyses. In the deepest analyses of power psychology, the Queen's actions went beyond merely borrowing an item. From Catherine's perspective, it was an attempt to neutralize presence. In front of the staff, the operators of the palace machinery, diminishing the position of an heir, sent a clear message about a shift in the hierarchy of priorities. The final blow was not in the possession itself, but in its purpose. Assigning a royal treasure for the personal use of someone outside the official system constituted a principled misalignment. At this moment, Catherine's tears were not merely personal grief, but the shattering of trust in a system of fair and transparent governance. To understand why this event caused such a shock, we need to examine the deeper significance of the 3 artifacts that were relocated: the Oriental Circle. The Pillar of Serenity. This is not a symbol of ostentation, but a reminder of a leadership style that requires no fanfare yet carries immense weight. It represents the inner balance that Catherine has painstakingly cultivated. The Cambridge Lover's Knot, the generational link. This piece carries the coded memory of a legendary figure, Diana. Wearing it is not merely an act of display, but an act of continuing the mission. When this item was taken, that spiritual link was directly violated. The lotus flower tiara, the symbol of transformation. For Catherine, this represents her mark of growth and adaptability in adversity. Its requisition for purposes outside royal duties was seen as a profane act against the values it embodies. William's reaction, a silence heavy with the promise of the coming storm, signaled that the protective system had officially been activated. His words, "That is unacceptable," were not merely the comfort of a husband, but a declaration of a guardian of future order. In a world of hidden boundaries, when respect is replaced by the imposition of power, confrontation becomes inevitable. The safety Catherine felt leaning against William's shoulder was the calm before a campaign of status restoration began. At 6:54 a.m., a strategic decision was made to break all customary waiting procedures. In crisis management theory, William's action is referred to as a direct intervention. Catherine and William's preparation extended beyond words into the realm of visual language. Their attire, minimalist, formal, and exuding steadfastness, sent a non-verbal message to the entire palace. This was not a family visit, but an inquiry into the integrity of protocol. The unannounced appearance at the monarch's office was a rare move, disrupting Buckingham's carefully programmed operational schedule. When King Charles's office door closed, the space became a true crisis management room. Here, Catherine presented the matter with absolute control over her emotions. She did not speak of sadness. She spoke of a serious breach of protocol. By detailing the 3 symbols, the Oriental Circle, the Cambridge Lover's Knot, and the Lotus Flower Tiara, she was reasserting control over the heritage portfolio entrusted to her. The crucial factor that forced King Charles to change his stance was this detail: the incident occurred openly in front of staff without the consent of the directly responsible party. In the royal system, this is considered a serious systemic breach, threatening the stability of the hierarchical structure. When William asserted that it was the Queen who issued the directive, the dialogue shifted from an internal dispute to a power-control confrontation. Does sovereign authority have the right to override established protocols to protect the monarchy's reputation? The climax of the analysis centers on the use of the Lotus Flower Tiara. When Catherine revealed that a national treasure had been diverted outside the system for the personal use of someone without royal responsibility, she touched the ultimate limit of tolerance within tradition. This was no longer a matter of aesthetics or priority, it was a question of legitimacy. Misusing heritage symbols risks eroding public trust in the professionalism of the monarchy. King Charles's tense reaction indicated that he fully grasped the magnitude of this breach. In the confined space of the monarch's office, words like inappropriate carried the weight of 1,000 pounds. When Catherine asserted that a heritage item had been removed from the royal circle for personal use, she was not merely complaining about a piece of jewelry. She was highlighting a breach of public duty ethics within the palace. King Charles's reaction, a heavy sigh, and rubbing his temples, revealed a leader recognizing fractures within his own team. William's insistence that this was an act of abuse of power to diminish status transformed the conversation into a hearing on fairness. Here, the boundary between sovereign authority and personal respect was put on the scales. The moment King Charles pressed the button to summon the Queen marked an unprecedented turning point in modern history. It signaled a shift from quiet reconciliation to direct confrontation. As the Queen entered with her usual confidence, a clash between two governance ideologies erupted. The Queen's doctrine viewing royal items as institutional tools, where supreme power can be flexibly exercised to assert AOT. The heir's doctrine viewing royal items as heritage and boundaries, where respect for protocol forms the foundation that prevents the system from being eroded by personal whims. The Queen's remark about flexing the rules when others forget their place was a direct shot at the existing hierarchical structure. King Charles's intervention at the end of the dialogue served as a reaffirmation of the endurance of principle. By declaring, "This family does not operate that way," he was making an effort to restore the balance that had been disrupted. This was not merely about defending Catherine, it was about safeguarding the very reputation of the crown against the threats of overreach. Yet is such decisiveness enough to quell the undercurrents? As the Queen's assertiveness met the heir's steadfastness under the monarch's watchful eye, a new chapter of uncertainty unfolded for Buckingham. In these tense moments within the King's office, we witnessed a rare instance of sovereign order executing a decisive self-correction. King Charles's assertion was not just a personal ruling, it activated a reputation preservation mechanism. The order to return the 3 tiaras immediately, and more importantly, the revocation of the Queen's right to use these symbols at the upcoming major events, constituted a form of symbolic demotion. In the royal world, where presence is inseparable from objects of power appearing without them, sends a silent message of a systemic reprimand. Within just a few hours, the artifacts were returned to their original positions in the treasury. This was a covert yet thorough incident containment campaign. During the Booker Prize ceremony and the birthday events, the public saw only an image of the Queen in elegant minimalist jewelry. From a media perspective, this was hailed as modernization. From a systems analysis perspective, it was the result of an internal disciplinary ruling. The absence of the tiara on the Queen's head represented a calculated power gap, a loaded silence behind Buckingham's stone walls. The true climax of this investigation unfolded weeks later at a state banquet. When Catherine entered wearing the Eastern Circle, tiara order had been fully restored. Her choice of this particular tiara, the very piece that sparked the entire crisis, was no coincidence. It was an act of reasserting ownership. Catherine did not wear it to display beauty. She wore it as a statement of legitimacy. In a system where power can be contested, composure and dignity serve as the strongest barriers to protect personal boundaries. The story of the tiaras closed with a profound lesson on the structure of respect. We recognize that in a long-standing institution, status does not come solely from titles. It must also be earned through conduct and adherence to core values. Prince William, in his role as future guardian, took a bold step to protect the nucleus of his family. This intervention sent a steel-clad message: any attempt to erase someone's presence or diminish their dignity will be met with the power of tradition and reason. What do you think about how the royal system self-corrected in this situation? Is Prince William's decisiveness, coupled with King Charles's ruling, enough to establish a lasting boundary for the future? It's important to note that this entire analysis is built on hypotheses and unpublished public perspectives, aiming to provide the most multidimensional and objective view of what is happening behind closed doors. We are not just watching a story unfold, we are decoding the source code of one of the oldest institutions in the world. Don't stay passive, interact with me. Press 1 for curiosity or 0 for skepticism. And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue unraveling the secrets hidden behind the palace curtain. Within the structure of a long-standing institution, for an individual to embody the core values of the nation is not only an honor, but also a form of systemic pressure. Princess Anne and King Charles, two pillars of traditional order, have long been regarded as the perfect custodians of the strictest rules. Yet behind the quietude of ceremonial rituals, there appear to be undercurrents of emotion and history that time cannot erase. Could there be an invisible boundary gradually fading? Are the secrets kept for decades truly shadows? Or are they the missing pieces needed to decode the true essence of the resilience we continue to witness? We will not chase rumors. Instead, we will analyze the interactions between individuals within a system governed by age-old conventions. One of the most noteworthy aspects is the relationship between Princess Anne and Queen Camilla. On television, the world sees a harmonious blend of etiquette. However, from a systems psychology perspective, this harmony seems to lack a genuine emotional connection. A static distance exists between them. This isn't a direct conflict, but rather the presence of historical boundaries that have never been bridged. This estrangement is not a random occurrence. It seems to be the inevitable result of a series of events that unfolded decades ago when concepts of duty and affection began to intersect, creating complex variables. To understand reality, we must go back to a time when the old order still reigned supreme. Before becoming part of the power structure, Camilla was associated with Andrew Parker Bowles, a figure with a particularly deep connection to Princess Anne. Here we see a hypothesis of personal sacrifice in the face of systemic barriers. Princess Anne and Andrew once shared a genuine connection. But at the time, differences in faith and the strict rules of the church created an insurmountable wall between them. It's not just a story of two individuals. It's a clash between the yearning for freedom and institutional order. Princess Anne's choice of Andrew as godfather for her daughter Zara demonstrates a timeless appreciation, a bond enduring despite social labels. The complexity intensifies as timelines intertwine, forcing each person to follow a different path. King Charles, then a young prince, entered Camilla's life. An attraction based on calmness and understanding blossomed, but once again the system spoke up. Standards of suitability, family expectations, and military service created a fateful silence. When Charles returned, the old picture had been replaced by a new reality, the marriage of Camilla and Andrew. A cycle of regret and repressed emotions was formed. Could it be that these very knots have created a psychological legacy that influences how members of the royal family interact with each other to this day? Every system operates on a balance between individual ego and collective expectations. When personal emotions are forced to give way to symbolic values, what happens to the truths behind them? What do you think of this hypothesis? Were the strict rules of the past tools for protecting stability, or are they the very source of the silent rifts we are seeing? Time may fade memories, but within the structure of a symbolic family, it often deepens underlying bonds. Princess Anne, after establishing her own path with rigorous royal duties, maintained an invisible but enduring connection with Andrew Parker Bowles. Here we face an intriguing variable. When Camilla entered her formal marriage to King Charles, a complex web of relationships was formed. The woman at the center of the current system had once been intimately connected to both Anne's confidant and her brother. From a systems analysis perspective, this is not simply a love story, but an overlapping of social roles, creating significant psychological pressure on the stability of internal relationships. Princess Anne has always been considered the embodiment of the traditional model, where devotion, order, and adherence to rules are never allowed to be shaken. For a mindset that values consistency so highly, the appearance of Camilla is not just an addition to the family, but a sign of disruptive change. Could it be that in the mind of a heritage guardian, Camilla's presence also evokes the most turbulent periods of the royal family? This contrast isn't an open war, but rather a difference between two sets of values. One representing absolute steadfastness to the past, and the other symbolizing adaptation and restructuring after setbacks. For decades, this quietude has been maintained as a shield protecting the public image. However, as roles within the palace begin to be redefined, the cracks in this relationship are gradually becoming apparent. Respect in the royal world is never a free gift. It's a currency that must be accumulated over time and through trials. Their interactions, described as minimal politeness, are in fact a systemic defense mechanism. There are no direct confrontations, no harsh words, only carefully calculated distances. For Anne, acceptance seems like a rigorous verification process. Can an individual truly integrate into the system if they have been a disruptive force in the past? Camilla, in her position, understood that entering an established structure was a journey fraught with prejudice. Princess Anne's strength and assertiveness mirrored the expectations the system placed upon her. In her silent struggle for acceptance, the story wasn't just about who was right and who was wrong, but about how to reconcile old wounds into a shared future. We have journeyed through layers of time, from the harsh rules of faith to the intricate web of personal relationships. Behind the diplomatic smiles and formal ceremonies lies a complex tapestry of sacrifice, responsibility, and emotions never officially named. In a system that values stability, like the monarchy, do forgiveness and acceptance truly exist, or is it all just a perfect arrangement to maintain the survival of a symbol? And if you were in their position, would you choose to uphold old principles or open yourself to a new beginning fraught with uncertainty? In any hierarchy, recognition comes not from words, but from action. Camilla, in her quest for a legitimate place, embarked on what we might call a demonstration of duty. Instead of merely appearing as a symbol alongside King Charles, she became deeply involved in charitable structures and community missions. Under the watchful eye of Princess Anne, who considered devotion the sole measure, a subtle shift occurred. As instinctive resistance subsided, it was replaced by professional recognition. However, we need to analyze carefully. Does this recognition equate to warmth? The answer seems to lie in the gap between two different worldviews. Here we see an implicit dialogue between two schools of thought. Princess Anne, the silence of the rock. She represents the classic royal mindset where duty is performed quietly, without the need for praise and completely detached from the media spotlight. Camilla, modern adaptation. Entering the system from the outside, she understands that the existence of the monarchy in the 21st century requires a bridge connecting with the public through understanding and positive communication. This difference didn't create enemies, but it created two parallel paths that would never intersect. For Anne, the crown was an eternal burden. For Camilla, it was a journey of constant learning. The moment King Charles officially ascended the throne was also the moment the established standards were put to the test. In private meetings behind the palace curtains, Princess Anne played the role of guardian of the standards. Without harsh words, Anne posed a fundamental question: can the devotion of a spouse be measured by time or by genuine transformation? This was not a personal attack, but a test of loyalty to the institution. For someone who had dedicated her life to unconditional service like Anne, the level of devotion was a very high threshold that not everyone could easily cross. As the system sought to stabilize after the upheavals, a new light emerged, altering the entire distribution of energy within the palace. Catherine, Princess of Wales. If Camilla represented the effort to adapt, Catherine embodied a natural harmony. The Princess of Wales not only received public support, but also evoked memories of an ideal role model from the past. From an analysis of her influence, we see a psychological eclipse phenomenon, no matter how hard Camilla tries. Catherine's radiant and amiable presence seems to be casting an invisible shadow. Catherine's rise is not just a story of fame. It is the emergence of a new balancing point in the royal family. Someone who can connect Anne's rigorous values with the approachability of the new generation. We are witnessing a power struggle between positions and influence. While Princess Anne remains a firm moral compass, Camilla faces a new challenge, not only gaining acceptance within the family, but also finding her own voice amidst the powerful allure of the next generation. What is your hypothesis? Is Princess Anne's strictness necessary to uphold the core values of the royal family? Or is the presence of new figures like Catherine the key to this institution's continued existence in the public eye based on analyses of the character and depth of these royal figures? Let's leave comment number 2. If you are impressed with how they are asserting their position and preserving their heritage, leave a comment. Number 5. If you notice other mysteries still waiting to be solved in the future, don't forget to press like and subscribe to the channel book now to avoid missing out on the most insightful analyses of the world of power symbols. In a system built on titles, the emergence of a middle-class figure like Catherine, Princess of Wales, created an interesting breakpoint. One theory suggests that Catherine's sophistication stemmed not from her lineage, but from a combination of modern education and self-effort. This creates a paradox. While the world admired Catherine's approachability within the confines of the ancient walls, she was a challenge to established norms. Could the underlying distance between Camilla and Catherine not be merely personal prejudice, but rather a resistance from an old order to a model of popular monarchy? Catherine represents a future where public support is the true measure of power, something Camilla, no matter how hard she tries, always faces obstacles from the past. Here we see two contrasting journeys. Camilla's journey, a journey of redemption and perseverance over decades, to gradually gain acceptance. Catherine's journey, an almost immediate explosion of faith and love. This contrast created systemic pressure on the role of the queen consort. While Camilla relied on experience and perseverance to assert her position, Catherine used soft power, kindness, and modern style to become the soul of the new era. It was a silent competition where every step, every smile was a message about who would truly redefine the image of the royal family in the public eye. Amidst the undercurrents of fame and influence, Princess Anne remained a guiding landmark. As tensions among the female members of the family showed signs of escalating, Anne took what analysts called asserting priorities. Instead of engaging in debates about media image, Anne focused on strengthening the crown's power structure. She chose to act quietly but decisively, prioritizing core tasks that she believed were essential to the institution's survival. Her actions were not merely fulfilling her duty, but a message to both Camilla and Catherine that glamour may come and go, but responsibility to the crown is constant. Our investigation into the hidden corners of the palace has revealed a multifaceted picture: Anne's meticulousness, Camilla's persistent efforts, and Catherine's modern appeal. Three women, three representatives of different periods of history, are together creating a turbulent new chapter for the British monarchy. If you were at the helm, would you prioritize the steadfastness of tradition, like Princess Anne, or the modern adaptability of Catherine? Can Camilla truly overcome the shadow of the past when the standards of the ideal queen are gradually changing with the next generation? And finally, how will Princess Anne's next actions affect the power structure between Camilla and Catherine? Is her silence an acceptance or a warning of impending upheaval? While discussions about the royal family's future continue in London, Princess Anne chooses to appear in a highly symbolic setting: Guernsey Island. This was not merely a diplomatic visit, but a journey into the core of history, where 80 years ago the concepts of freedom and resilience were redefined after the dark years of World War II. From a systemic perspective, Princess Anne's presence at the 80th anniversary of Liberation Day was a strategic move to strengthen the living thread. She represented not only the crown, but also the continuation of a legacy left by Queen Elizabeth II, the royal presence in vital moments for the nation. A remarkable aspect of Princess Anne's approach is her breaking down of ceremonial barriers to connect with personal stories. When she takes the time to listen to the elderly, the last remaining witnesses of the occupation, a historical energy exchange takes place. She doesn't seek glamorous photos for the media. Her attentiveness is a message of recognition. For those who have lived through fear and loss, Anne's presence is like an affirmation that their sacrifices are an integral part of the national fabric. This is how the royal family maintains its legitimacy, not through social media posts, but by being the keepers of the flame for the most important memories. At the solemn church ceremony, Princess Anne's speech carried special weight. Her affirmations of not being forgotten were not merely words of comfort, but a commitment from the institution. In particular, her conveying warm congratulations from King Charles created a resonance effect. We see a well-coordinated mechanism. The king entrusts his faith, and Princess Anne, as the most dedicated executor, translates that faith into practical action. Recalling the hospitality received by King Charles and Queen Camilla a year earlier is also a clever way to unite the royal family members, despite the differences in personal styles we've analyzed earlier. The subsequent journey to Sark Island, a small but historically rich community, further clarifies Anne's philosophy. No community is too small to be forgotten. Her unwavering commitment to this memorial tour, despite the pressures and demanding schedule, demonstrates an ironclad sense of responsibility. It is her way of protecting the crown, by being present where it is most needed at the most meaningful time. Princess Anne's trip to the Channel Islands painted a stark contrast to the media frenzy at the palace. While the world was busy comparing Catherine's modernity with Camilla's efforts to adapt, Anne quietly built bridges between the past and the present. A hypothesis for us to ponder. Could it be that these quiet, historically significant journeys are what truly keep the monarchy standing against the storms of the digital age? In a world changing so rapidly, is Princess Anne's steadfastness to the past an outdated value or an indispensable spiritual anchor for the people? How do you assess the way Princess Anne represented King Charles in these historical events? When a royal visit sheds its rigid ceremonial layers, it becomes a reunion of witnessing souls. In Guernsey and Sark, we see not just a princess on duty, but a memory archive in operation. Personal stories, inherently small compared to the grand narrative of history, are the very atoms that make up the power of the crown in this new era. Perhaps the true value of royalty lies in its ability to transform the dry data of war into vibrant emotions. Let's analyze how the last surviving witnesses passed on their historical genetic code to future generations through Princess Anne. Let's consider the case of Winnie Coe. At age 85, the memory of her first chocolate bar was not simply a taste experience. From a systems analysis perspective, it marked the collapse of an isolated order and the rebirth of hope. In an environment where hunger was used as a tool of control, tasting the sweetness of relief packages was an emotional revolution. The contrast between the fear of receiving candy from an enemy soldier and the pure joy of accepting help from an ally creates a complex psychological structure. Princess Anne, by listening to these details, inadvertently acts as an authenticator of the human values that triumphed in the darkest hour. Another aspect of the heritage preservation system is the ability to reconstruct pain. Sally Roberts' story and the poem extracted from wartime letters are a prime example. Instead of being left to rot in a drawer, these old manuscripts were transformed into a public message before the royal court. This was a mechanism of collective spiritual purification. When the poem was read aloud before Princess Anne, it ceased to be the property of a single family and became part of the national heritage. Royal recognition elevated personal emotions to an enduring spiritual value, reminding us that forgetfulness is a second occupation. Finally, let's analyze Jeff Nicholson's reaction to the princess's unannounced visit. In a world where every royal move is meticulously planned down to the second, the 30-minute preparation period seems like a test of authenticity. This surprise removed the barriers of elaborate preparation, leaving behind a purely human encounter. This can be seen as a highly effective visible presence strategy. It shows that royalty doesn't just exist in staged events, but that they are always ready to be present in the reality of the people. Princess Anne's journey through the islands was more than just a celebration of the 80th anniversary of liberation. It was a profound inquiry into the power of memory and the role of gratitude in shaping the future. From the sweetness of chocolate to verses from memory, it all created a symphony of resilience. In the digital age where everything moves so fast, are we losing the ability to listen to the small stories that hold such great value as Princess Anne did? Within an institution where stability is measured in centuries, even the slightest shift in the frequency of appearances and public response signals a profound structural realignment. As Princess Anne continues to reinforce the foundations through sheer endurance, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, begins to occupy the emotional space of the public, a systemic question emerges. Where will Queen Camilla's position lie within this new map of influence? From a strategic analytical perspective, we are witnessing an invisible yet extraordinarily powerful convergence between Anne's steel discipline and Catherine's soft power. This convergence is exerting an invisible pressure on the role of the Queen Consort, compelling the system to recalibrate itself in order to meet the public's increasingly high expectations. A compelling illustration of this soft power was the quiet yet highly symbolic visit by Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, to Guildhall. This was not merely a conventional Holocaust memorial event. It was a lesson in how a modern symbol can connect with humanity's deepest wounds. Catherine's appearance, unconfirmed, until the very last moment generated a distinct psychology of surprise effect. In the world of media, withholding information is not a flaw, but a deliberate strategy to focus attention on the message rather than the ritual. When Catherine entered the room, the atmosphere stirred not merely because of celebrity, but because of the presence of a guardian of memory. What elevated this visit far beyond a royal obligation was the thread of continuity dating back to 2020. Catherine did not simply meet historical witnesses. She applied her own artistic lens to preserve their faces and souls through the commemorative photographs marking the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Here let us examine a hypothesis. When a member of the royal family personally undertakes the preservation of heritage through art, they are no longer an external observer. Catherine has woven herself into the historical continuum of the witnesses. The reunion at Guildhall was not a diplomatic ritual, but a deeply human encounter. Her body language, eye contact, and gentleness testified to a form of systemic empathy, something no title alone can organically confer. In the solemn chamber of Guildhall, amid candlelight and tear-filled speeches, Catherine stood as a bridge between a painful past and a hopeful future. The photographs she had taken years earlier were displayed once more, but this time they carried a different weight. They were evidence of long-term commitment. This contrast poses a genuine challenge for Queen Camilla. While Camilla relies on experience and formal presence, Catherine is building an empire of trust, grounded in empathy and deep personal connections. Could this mark a turning point, one in which Anne's quiet influence and Catherine's increasingly radiant stature redefine who truly embodies the soul of the monarchy? In a world saturated with noise, silence can sometimes be the most powerful language of all. At the memorial ceremony, Catherine did not choose to place herself at the center of speeches. Instead, she chose empathetic presence. By standing quietly observing and listening to the historical witnesses, Catherine demonstrated a fundamental truth of soft power respect is not built through words, but through the capacity for genuine empathy. Her gaze never left the survivors, those who had emerged from the ashes of history. It was not the curiosity of a detached observer, but the conviction of a guardian of legacy. Beside her, Prince William reinforced an image of continuity and support. They were not standing there merely as members of the royal family. They stood as bridges between a painful past and the future's responsibility to remember. The photographs Catherine took are not simply visual art. They are mechanisms of historical validation reminding us that humanity endures even in the darkest of moments. However, behind those quiet and deeply human moments, another reality is silently taking shape within the structure of the monarchy. Let us pose a future-oriented hypothesis. What happens if the central pillar, King Charles, is no longer there to maintain equilibrium? From a systems analysis perspective, Queen Camilla occupies a position that is heavily dependent on the king's support. Should that variable change, a reconfiguration of power would inevitably follow. In such a scenario, Camilla could face a form of institutional isolation. On one side would stand the public's near-universal admiration for Catherine, a symbol of modern empathy. On the other side stands the quiet authority and unshakable credibility of Princess Anne, the guardian of the monarchy's most exacting traditional values. In such a scenario, Queen Camilla's position would be caught between two powerful vices of influence. Would her years of perseverance be enough to hold her ground without the protection of the crown itself? Or would she gradually be pushed away from the epicenter of power, making room for a new era, one in which empathy and tradition are redefined by the Anne-Catherine axis? From Princess Anne's quiet, steady steps to Catherine's presence, charged with soft power, every piece seems to converge toward a future matrix of unpredictable shifts within the monarchy. We are not merely witnessing changes in faces, we are observing a large-scale self-recalibration within a millennia-old institution. How do you assess this shift of focus among the generations of women who hold the monarchy's very soul? Is this a preparation for a new era, or a final effort to uphold values increasingly challenged by time? This content is entirely for reference based on hypotheses and unverified public speculation. Let's discuss it from an objective, analytical perspective. Don't stay silent, engage with me. Press 1 for curiosity and 0 for skepticism. Hit like and subscribe to continue the journey of uncovering the secrets behind the spotlight.